Imagine you're walking down the aisle in a grocery store. You're in the water aisle, and all you see is a sea of sameness. Plastic bottles, blue labels, mountains and streams on the packaging. Every brand promising purity in almost the exact same voice. Then, a tall boy can shows up that looks more like a metal band's album cover than a health drink. The words "murder your thirst" scream off the side. It doesn't whisper wellness, it screams rebellion. In 2017, Mike Cessario, a creative director steeped in skate culture, punk rock, and the art of branding, asked a question that made zero sense on paper. What if you sold water like it was a beer or energy drink? Everyone thought it was ridiculous. The name was too dark, the branding too aggressive, the market too crowded, and yet, just a few years later, Liquid Death has become one of the fastest growing beverage brands in America, turning the dullest product imaginable into a cultural phenomenon. And that's why we're here. On Wrong on Paper, we tell the stories of brands and leaders who made decisions that look crazy, foolish, even reckless at first glance, and yet those same bad ideas, they became the breakthroughs that changed everything. Today's episode is about how Liquid Death took an idea that should have drowned in doubt and turned it into a billion-dollar wave. Here we go. Man, all right, this story starts in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
It's also like America, one of the founding cities is Philadelphia. So we have some symbolism for origin stories. Mike Cessario, founder, CEO of Liquid Death, born in Philadelphia, grew up in skate culture. He grew up in punk rock culture. Like that was his childhood, high school years, and was really formative for his identity as he transitioned to his first role professionally as a creative director.
You know, and along the way, he was a musician. And I
That's
don't know if
right.
you remember, he was
Yep.
going to be a musician, but got frustrated because so much of being a musician depends on other people. And he wanted something I think he could control a little more the outcome of and kind of migrated away from. But that he was steeped in that kind of culture. And so he's obviously got a creative bent and a creative wiring based on the things that he gravitated toward.
I think frustration is a theme of his entire life up
That's a good
until Liquid.
point.
So frustration on being a musician, and then we move into he's a creative director at several agencies and
Yeah,
multiple
and
stops.
and I think another important part of he went to a design school,
That's right.
where he met some of the people that would be key to his success later. I can't remember do you remember the name of it? But it's a small
Yeah.
design school. I wanna say it was in Delaware or something like that. So, but I think design was something he was attracted to.
Yeah. Creative director focused on design for
Yeah.
sure was his focus on how that creativity manifested. And really, I feel like the headline of his time as a creative director across multiple agencies was what he believed to be great ideas continually killed by, as he would say, either his boss or the client. Like he felt like there were all these great ways a brand could show up in a differentiated, unique way. And time again, either his boss didn't give it to the client because of the risk involved in the idea, or the client didn't go forward on it. One of the ideas that it is emblematic of this that he shares multiple times in many interviews was Callaway Golf was a brand of his, and Callaway Golf was launching a new driver called El Diablo.
Mm.
And his idea was insane, mostly unhinged, but the idea was like, let's run a single page ad in golf magazines where if a customer rips out the page and signs a contract selling their soul, the first 100 or so people who return that would get a free driver in the mail. And I forget who killed it, the client or his boss, but he shares that story as one of his favorite ideas that got killed, and it really made him think, well, what's the best way for my best ideas to have the chance to live?
Yeah, and one of the themes along the way that was very, I guess, resonated with me a lot is that generally speaking, people revert to the norm.
Mm.
They revert to the center. It's like when you get to these extremes, people become uncomfortable and they want to revert back to the norm and the safety of the norm. But that's where you end up with the sea of sameness that you talked about in the introduction of all these brands that basically look the same and it's really safe to be there. And I think this is a story of someone who ventured outside of safe and was rewarded for it.
And almost seems to be wired to need to be outside of safe.
Yes.
It seems like there's not just a risk tolerance, there's a risk desire profile for. Mike
It's
Cessario.
even bigger than that too, because I think as we get into the story and as it unfolds, we'll find that it's not just safety either. It's thinking counterintuitively, thinking counterculturally, which is what allows him to be wrong on paper, because the right on paper always reverts to the norm and the safety and the warmth and the comfort of the current norm. But to make big breakthroughs, you've got to get outside of the normal thinking, the you know uh, uh, the tendency we all have to want to be safe and uh, make things easy. But counterintuitive, I think, is another word that really describes a lot of this. It's the opposite of what we would naturally think.
I think that's almost a design question he uses at every stage of an execution. It's what's the opposite of what everybody else is doing?
Yes.
And then how do we find the most absurd, what's past the edge idea in the opposite direction? And he goes after that thing. I think so. He calls out the El Diablo driver as a formative moment. He also calls out this moment that I think a lot of us want to go apples to apples. Like the idea for Liquid Death came directly from this. It wasn't until he looked back a little time later that this made sense to him. But in 2009, Mike Cessario was working, activating against the Vans Warped Tour.
Yes.
And Monster Energy Drink was one of the leading sponsors of the Vans Warped Tour. And he noticed something and tucked it away subconsciously in the back of his head that Monster Energy Drink was providing water, not energy drink, in their cans to the musicians. And the idea being that musicians, high output of energy, they're not going to be drinking caffeine and sugar all day. They need water to hydrate them throughout the day. And so Monster cleverly packaged water in their energy drink
And
cans.
what was really fascinating about that portion to me was the fact that he noticed the can said tour water, like was printed on the can. What they didn't do is take the energy drink, dump it out, and replace it with water. Literally, they created cans specifically for the tour that had water that they could open just like a regular can and whatever. It wasn't pouring their product out and replacing it. They designed it that way, which was fascinating to me, because the easy solution would have just been to pour out the energy drink and put water in. But I think there was at least some brand fidelity
Yeah.
involved with it, where they
Yes.
said, nope, we're going to create a
We're going to own
special
this.
version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So that happens. He continues on as a creative director. Time goes on. He decides the only way to do the creative he wants to do is to be able to own a product. So most people start with, I have a vision for a product that needs to exist in the world. How do I market it? His question was, I have all these creative ideas that nobody will let me do. How do I find a product just to allow me to do creative executions? Was really the process. He starts with evaluating the landscape and starts with brandy.
Yes.
All right, you know the brandy story.
Yes. So he picked brandy because he felt like brandy tasted that bourbon was really starting to find itself. He felt like brandy tasted almost like, from a taste standpoint, very little different. In fact, if anything, the brandy was just a little sweeter.
That's right, just a little bit sweeter.
But he felt like the category was boring. He literally said he saw a lot of brandy bottles with dust on them. And he said that was almost in, a picture of the category. It's just a dusty old category without any vibrance. And he felt like maybe I could get in there, create something, really special, because it was so boring. And I think that's another theme we see throughout this. What are the boring brands that he could go in and really invigorate through marketing?
There's also there's the business fable that I'm going to butcher, but it's like two salespeople go to an island, and on the island, none of the inhabitants on the island wear shoes. And the first salesperson comes back and tells his boss, no market here for shoes. We should look elsewhere. Second salesperson comes back to his company and says, oh my gosh, untapped market. Nobody's wearing shoes. We need to go back. And there's some of the where most people don't see opportunity. He sees boring as run to boring and make it not boring.
Yes.
Instead of most people saying hey, this is a boring industry or a boring category, we should stay away because it's not creative inherently. And so brandy goes, the concept, it gets off the ground. The brandy brand exists for a number of years. It ultimately fails. It doesn't become much. He calls really that point of rolling off of the brandy idea one of the low points. He's now had frustrations across the board as a creative director. He set out on his own to launch his own company. That's now failed, and he has this in-between space of being pretty down.
So an important part of that story too is he later says that without the failure in brandy, Liquid Death would never have been possible. It's almost like he learned those lessons on a small scale. And some of the lessons I remember is, one, he partnered with the wrong people. There wasn't alignment with the people he partnered with in that. And I think that led to some frustration.
Yes.
He said, secondly, they spent all their money on actually creating the product, and then they had no money left to market it. And so there were some flaws in that
Yep.
led to the seeds of the fruit that launched Liquid Death later. And I think a lot of the mistakes he made, and instead of just giving up, he said, I'm going to learn from those, and then applied them, to the next round.
So he thinks about the next round, and he's trying to come up with a product. What does he build marketing around? And he notices something about the water category. He notices that everything is packaged in plastic, and all marketing seems to be shades of the same, right? There's a range of brands that exist in the water category, but water has traditionally been marketed as purity. So you have clear plastic bottles. All of the branding is very clear, minimalistic, and lots of blues. And he realizes, like, hey, why does a health product need to be marketed in a non-fun way as a health product? What if we took, he essentially had this idea of, like, all of the fun marketing happens on unhealthy food and beverages.
Yeah, beer, candy, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, snacks, sugary snacks, savory snacks.
He even threw fast food in there.
Fast food in there, yeah. We'll give him a pass on that one. We'll disagree there, but it realized, like, hey, like, why can't you take the fun marketing that exists in the unhealthy category and apply it to a healthy category?
Yeah.
And so a couple of realizations. So water, sea of sameness, there's opportunity. It's boring. All these things are calling him in. He has this vision grew up in, like, the skater, punk rock energy drinks were a big thing in the community he grew up in. So he had this creative vision of what could be different in an extreme way. And then he also talks about, when you start a company, you don't have the capital to compete with larger companies in the category. And so he said all of our marketing had to work in the product. And so when they thought about the name and they thought about the packaging, he viewed choosing the name and packaging not as product development, but as marketing exercises. So I think they literally asked the question, what's the dumbest name that we could come up with? And after a series of iterations, ended up with Liquid Death.
Yep.
And then they looked at
which
please.
I want to camp on that for a minute, because part of what he was doing there is something I've seen many times in life. Sometimes the best lessons are learned in the extremes. And a lot of us want to avoid the extremes. He embraced the extreme. He said, what is the absolute craziest name we could ever come up with? Because it was an extreme. And I think sometimes you've got to go to the extreme. You may not always stay there, but going to the extreme sometimes is what gets us out of this mode of safety and comfort in the middle. And, you got to get out there, even if you end up coming back a little bit after you get out there. But I think that whole concept of starting with the dumbest possible name you could think of is what produced the Liquid Death name. Said no one would ever buy anything called Liquid Death. That's stupid.
I love that. The best lessons are learned in the extreme. There's a former creative director for Wieden and Kennedy. His name's Jason Bagley. And he often talks about his role as a creative director was to push his team to push beyond the edge of madness. Like, every idea, your job, whether you're a copywriter, a designer, is to push an idea beyond the edge of madness. It's my job to be the filter of, like, what gets to our client. But, like, you don't worry about constraints. Like, you push about, like, pushing past absurd.
Yeah.
And I'll rein it in to be on brief and on strategy.
I'm even reminded of our last podcast about Airbnb, where they went through that whole exercise where they went to the extreme, and, and that opened up their minds to some ideas they wouldn't have considered.
It's so good. So, all right, so you have the extreme on the name, and then they viewed their best marketing on the packaging design, so the can design. They essentially, and it makes total sense looking backwards, like, if you look at the water section in a grocery store, everything looks similar. And so they decided, somebody walking by the water section, when they scan the waters, They may not buy Liquid Death, but they will see it and remember
And
it
pick it up
and pick
look
it
at
up and look at it.
Yeah.
And so they essentially
Maybe take a picture of it.
and maybe say, yeah, and share like, what is this?
Yeah,
And so the entire marketing strategy early on, and we're getting ahead of ourselves, we'll peel it back, was built around how do we win on shelf space,
Yeah.
like the visual cue when it's sitting on a shelf against competitive products. So, but if we come back,
Yeah.
he didn't start with a product. He started with an idea, and it's one of those things of you have an idea, you go after it, and you learn all the things you don't know as you move forward and take action.
Yeah.
So one thing he realized was it's really hard to source canned water. Like there's a reason all these companies put water in plastic. And so the only place he could find that would can water for him was in Europe. There wasn't a place in the United States that he could find. And he also realized there wasn't a lot of investors getting excited to give him money to raise the money to purchase his first round of inventory.
Yeah.
So
a couple things there too is because so much of his story goes back to lessons learned previously because the seed of this whole thing had been planted when he was on the Vans Warped Tour.
Yep.
And he had seen people drinking water out of a can. And part of what he thought is, why don't they, sir? So, and the other thing though, this was a really important insight, is he used the word social camouflage. That time they needed to be able to drink water out of a can, but socially fit in.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I think part of the whole can idea was to give people cover. Like there are people that maybe don't want to drink alcohol. They're in an environment with beer and but they don't want to drink beer, but they don't want to be a social misfit.
Yeah.
So having water in a can became social camouflage, which I love that word. As part of the problem that this water solved was not just hydration. They get that from the plastic, but part of it was I want to fit into the social setting that I'm in. And part of that learning came from that Vans tour where he saw these guys drinking the energy drinks that were actually just water, but needed to fit in to what was going on there, needed to fit into the culture of these heavy, metal bands and all that kind of stuff. But he discovered, as time would go on, that people are in settings like a amphitheater watching a concert and stuff later, and we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit too. But
This is the first time I ever saw Liquid Death.
first time I ever saw it,
I was at a concert. Yes.
Yeah, it's the very first time I ever saw it. It's like, and I thought it was beer.
Yeah, I did too.
But it's kind of this social calendar. You could look.
I
like
ordered water and they handed it to me, and I almost gave it back and said, "No, I ordered water."
But I do think the seed was planted when he
Yes.
saw that at that tour. But the insight that he had was the social camouflage that provided, and that's one of the things this product solves for. The other thing that was along the I'll wait on this one. I was thinking about the Bros commercial
Okay.
that factors in, but we'll wait till we get to that.
Okay. I'll keep moving and then pull it in. So, all right. So he has the name picked out. The design is made. Realizes it's tough to source, but he's found somebody to do it, to manufacture and ship it to the United States. And he's also realizing I don't have the money to
Right. Because it was a minimum order.
a minimum
Minimum order was, I think,
250 units, 250,000 units,
Yeah,
not 250.
250,000
It's a big
units.
difference.
Yeah.
And I think it was going to be
That's gonna-
$150 to $200,000.
Right.
Didn't have
We didn't have that
that
kind of
money. So what he did,
And he also knew there's no one just on paper that I'm going to show them. We're going to sell something called Liquid Death. We're going to sell water in a can. No one was going to buy that.
yeah, nobody was lining up to throw.
No one was lining up to throw money. They all told him it was a terrible idea. In fact, most people were telling him that name itself. No one's going to, no retailer's going to stock it. No mom is going to give it to their kid. It's like all these reasons not to do it became evident.
Yeah, it wasn't only an unattractive investment idea. It was people viewed it as a categorically bad idea.
Yes.
Like this is, I mean, you call back to Airbnb. Airbnb, before it started to hit product market fit and scale, Brian Chesky was told over and over again, like, this is a bad idea.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I love about this podcast in general is on paper, this look
Terrible.
just stupid,
Yeah, it's stupid. Dumb,
Absolutely
stupid.
dumb, stupid.
Like only an idiot would do this.
Yes.
It is really the
Yeah.
vibe it gives off.
Yeah.
All right. So undeterred,
Yes.
Mike Cessario decides to set up a Facebook page for Liquid Death, and he uses $1,500, $1,500 to create a video, and uses $3,000, so $4,500 total, to run Facebook ads against it.
Yep. And
Blows up.
yeah, 3 million views, 80,000 people sign up to follow that Facebook page. And then he starts getting all these inquiries. Where can I buy this? Oh, another thing, part of the $1,500 he spent, he had somebody create a 3D rendering of a
Yeah.
can, of what the product would look like to put on the page so that everybody thought it was a
Is real.
product.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating. He didn't start with a product. He started with an ad, which is the genius of this. And it's like, I'm going to be able to prove to investors there is a market for this because I'm going to advertise it before it even exists, which is very counterintuitive. No one, that is so out of the box thinking. And it worked.
And it worked. It blew up. And all of a sudden, like, you go to an investor, and he went back to investors,
Right.
pitching that idea
million
versus coming back and saying, 3 million views,
But he even had
80,000.
comments, if you'll recall, where there was a 7-Eleven franchisee said he wanted to order some.
Mhm.
There were all these people. He started to get all these people now who wanted to order the product. Is this available? Is this a joke? Is it available? But now he almost had a predetermined customer list of 80,000 people that when he did produce it, might be interested in it.
And so he, this is later on, and we'll get to this more deeply later on, but when they think about, they as in Liquid Death, think about creative development, they said that they view social media almost like a comedian views like a local comedy joint, where like they go every day and do a different iteration until they feel like it's dialed in. And so Liquid Death view social media as not a place to ship perfect creative, but a place to test all of the ideas to understand what hits. And so the mentality was baked in from the beginning. It was, hey, like, I'm going to do a really scrappy video. And the video was crazy too. It was this woman doing a voiceover of how extreme water is.
Yeah.
Talking about how many deaths water contribute to humanity each year through like avalanche and drowning. It was insane. And it ends with Mike Cessario apparently is the guy
Yes.
who's blindfolded at the end of
waterboarded.
being waterboarded. I mean, just like you wonder why it got 3 million views. It was an unhinged, wild video.
Basically talking about how water destroys things and water kills
Yes.
people, and I think this is the part where it was inspired by some work he had done previously for a health food company,
Yes.
where they were serving these protein drinks, but the protein drinks they were serving were filled with, sugar and all these things that were bad for you. And so he did this ad. I think it was for the government, maybe even. I'm trying to remember.
Yes. So he does an ad for the government.
And it's like killing the bros. Like we're
Yes.
killing. There was this bro culture, which the bro culture were people who would go to the gym and work out and drink protein drinks to build their muscles, and they were all the bros. And they did this really cool commercial, still exists online, about how if we don't do something about these protein drinks,
It's like endangering animals.
we're
It was like,
endangering the bros.
Yes.
We may not have any bros anymore.
it is hilarious. And all right, so this is,
But that became, I think, the inspiration for, he was basically talking about how water kills people, in this ad. And, so again, it was these lines of thinking that go back in his experience.
so he also, I'm remembering, there's also, I forget which government health organization, but was trying to do public awareness against the dangers of energy drinks. And he pitched them the idea of doing water in a can as an activation. And it was deemed too expensive for the budget.
Yeah.
And so like, he said, all right, I think it's a great idea. If you're not going to do it, what can I do with it? And it essentially became $1 billion+ product.
Yeah, and then the bros commercial,
Yes.
Save the Bros, became kind of this whole water idea of water kills, and we got to do something about it. So anyway,
So it blows up, traction. And
it goes back to the investors,
Yes.
showing the 3 million views, showing the 80,000 people who signed up. Now all of a sudden, people are willing to invest in it. They do their first order, sells out in a month. They actually had just the opposite. They ordered what they thought would last on, and it sold out in a month. And then he had to buy himself some time because they were out of product, and it took a while to get the new product in.
And correct me if I'm misremembering. So this really launched in 2019.
Yeah.
And so you could say valuation was $0, unable to raise a penny. And by 2024, what's that, 5-ish years later, they became a $1 billion brand by valuation. And so the story really quickly in that period was Mike Cesario's ability to scale a team around him who thought just like him. The risk is, as they grew, would the corporate governance come in, and would you start to think like a bigger company? But he really created this team of creative misfits in the most say that in the most positive way,
Yes.
in an encouraging way, if you will, of people who are able to buy into this vision, and we'll get into principles later on, but who are willing to make decisions that had a high risk of either failing or offending, and still ship and put it out there, and it's continued to pay off
Yeah.
to this day.
So, a couple taglines that they used were "Murder your thirst." That was kind of the water part, but they also were anti-plastic.
Yeah.
So it was death to plastic was kinda, but I think a third dimension to this that's kinda interesting for me, especially with my marketing background, it was almost death to the marketing playbook. Death to the traditional marketing playbook was just as integral because traditional marketers thought about it one way and he thought about it completely different. He thought about marketing as entertainment,
Yeah.
and therefore the ads that they were putting out there competed not with, other water brands, Evian or Dasani or whatever. They competed with Netflix. They competed with Saturday Night Live was one of the things they talked about, and the fact that they would create ads that they felt like were entertaining enough that people would want to watch them regardless. Whereas most marketers kind of find something entertainment and then buy time during it.
Yeah.
But his idea was, no, let's make our marketing the product
Yes.
and make our marketing so entertaining that people want to see it.
Alright, so this they do it very differently, and a lot of this is I think Liquid Death in a lot of ways, the brand is built around the character and person of Mike Cessario in the same way that Savannah Bananas is built around the personality of Jesse Cole. I look at Savannah Bananas and Liquid Death, two wildly different companies whose creative looks and feels wildly different, but the through line between each is they've taken the product of baseball and said, "We're not gonna market baseball, we're gonna create entertainment off of the platform and foundation of baseball." Mike Cesario with Liquid Death has said, "We're not gonna market water, we're gonna create entertainment and build it and ground it on the platform or foundation of water." And I think those 2 things are really interesting and fundamentally different from how most corporate marketing functions are created.
Yeah. In fact, they even talked about the fact they're not marketing a product, they're creating a character.
Yes.
And one of the key lines that they used to use is, "What would Liquid Death do in this situation?" Like,
Mhm.
and so they kind of murdered the traditional brand playbook. It's like they don't have this traditional book that shows the fonts and the colors and all that kind of stuff that would become very bureaucratic and very autocratic over time. It was more this character of Liquid Death, and how would this character approach whatever they're doing?
Yep.
And that became a very informed, very different way of thinking about marketing, is marketing as a character, not, a tangential aspect of a product.
So, Andy Pearson is the VP of creative for Liquid Death today, and, I heard, in one of the things that podcasts we listen to, he talks about how he didn't say it this way, but I guarantee you every company in the world valued over $1 billion has brand guidelines. And he said they made, to build off of your point, the decision to not have brand guidelines because they didn't look at marketing as a process to run. They looked at it as a character to steward.
Yes.
And to your point, it was not like if we have brand guidelines, we're going to act rote and in a box. If we just view every opportunity that pops up, every idea as an opportunistic, serendipitous way to make a decision of what would the character of Liquid Death do in the situation, it allowed the freedom to stay fresh and relevant and not get stale. And because there's a little bit of the like what was funny yesterday is not funny today. And so if they just decided to run the same playbook over and over again, like there'd be a point of diminishing returns. So part of their challenge is like the threshold of what they do needs to grow and grow, and you need to open up the aperture of what's permissible to allow yourself the freedom to find the next thing to keep building on the story.
The other thing is, much of this brand is a story that's built on social media.
Yep.
And part of being on social media is you have to understand the algorithms, which they did. They understood the algorithms. They knew how to leverage the algorithms, but they also need to be able to respond quickly.
Mm.
Several things that really gained traction, You don't have like weeks, you got hours to do something about it. And the brand as a character allows you to quickly make decisions. Where if you needed a brand, playbook or whatever, now it doesn't even, whatever you're talking about doesn't even get covered in the, so now you got to make up new rules and processes and all that. So I think it just made it more fluid and more speedy.
Mm. All right, I have a question for you. So, social media, I'm not sure how I feel about this or if I agree or not. Mike Cessario, in an interview, talks about how a lot of legacy companies that have been around for decades, 100 years in food and beverage, he believes that the shelf life of a company is going to get shorter and shorter because of social media. Like, his comment was, he doesn't believe there will be any more 50-year companies that are created today. Like, they're going to die much faster. As you evaluate that statement, I think there's something to the potential for disruption has increased significantly,
Yes.
and the threat of brand death is higher than it ever has before. When you think about starting and stewarding a long-term brand in this social media landscape, do you agree with that statement, or do you think it's possible to still build
Yeah, because
a
one of the interesting comments he made along those lines, he said, Coca-Cola has been in existence for 120 years, but only 20 of those have been during the internet age.
Yeah.
And it's like, but I do think, like, when you think about 20 years ago with Coca-Cola, there were like 3 or 4 liquid products on the shelf at a grocery store, and now you got an entire aisle of competition, with all the different variations. So I think there will be more and more variations. But the flip side is that a brand is about a relationship, and I think if you can keep that relationship healthy and you can keep that relationship relevant,
Yeah.
it's kinda like the mission doesn't need to change, but the methods do as culture changes, and
Yes.
I think understanding the difference between mission and methods, you know, and your unwillingness to change your methods might lead to irrelevance.
Mm.
But if you're frequently changing the mission, that could lead to irrelevance too. So it's some balance of those 2.
Yeah, it's almost like the corporate marketing playbook is losing relevance.
Yes.
There's an interview between Mike Cesario and Shane Smith from Vice Media talking about how, like, people feel like a corporate voice coming through 99% of today's marketing.
Mm.
It's why they tune it out. It's why they either mute the TV when an advertisement is on, or they scroll past it when they're going through their social feed. And it's why you've called this one out when you think like an entertainer instead of a marketer. It changes the voice, it changes the purpose of what you're creating. Now you're creating a moment of delight for somebody else. You're not trying to persuade somebody to adopt a belief about a feature of a product that you want them to buy. It the nature of marketing, I think, is in this liminal or in between space right now, and the brands that can adopt, and there's almost like, if you try to be authentic, like, the more you use the word authentic, the less authentic you're probably being. But the brands that are willing to, like, understand who they are, what they stand for, and be grounded in that, knowing that some people might not be for that, and that's okay, instead of trying to capture everybody's, like, it's like the Paul Graham we talked about last episode, the Paul Graham, better be loved by 100 people than kinda liked by 1,000,000 people.
Yeah.
It's like, find that small group of people, and how do you get them to be in a relationship and love you versus trying to persuade 1,000,000 people that you kinda sorta have a product that kinda sorta might benefit them.
Getting back to your question about, the 50-year brand,
Mm.
another dimension to that is the ability to morph and change along the way. So for instance, well, there's a quote I love that says, when the rate of external change
Mm.
exceeds the rate of internal change, the end is near. Like if the external change is going on so much faster than internal change, at some point you implode on yourself. And so I think the rate of internal change in a brand has to really speed up given the time. So for instance, as it relates to this story, they quickly moved. I mean, think about it. This brand hadn't existed for what, 5 years? Do we say 5, 6 years?
Yep.
Well, in
Yeah,
addition
if that,
to
yeah.
water, which historically they may have ridden the water, for 10 minutes, they started adding sparkling drinks like carbonated
Iced tea,
they've got iced tea, but they've also got
soda, sparkling water.
sparkling
Yes.
water. They've added all these new products. In fact, we're enjoying one of
We
them
got
right
them, yeah.
here. This
Killer
is
Cola,
Killer Cola right here.
Dr. Death, and then your tried and true mountain water.
But their ability to create all these new relevant products for their, I think, helps them last longer than if they just tried to ride the liquid death water in a can train for too long.
All right, let's take this principle of the ability to adapt and evolve as things change in a landscape and recontextualize it. So Chick-fil-A is you have a lot of experiences, most of your experiences in Chick-fil-A. Or is there a moment or a couple of moments that you can think of where you saw Chick-fil-A effectively navigate shifting landscape?
100%, multiple times. Probably some of the more pronounced was, there was a point in time prior to 2007 and 8 where the food, like remember it's the economy stupid? Well, at Chick-fil-A, the appropriate or the similar expression would have been, it's the food stupid. And then all of a sudden in 2007, 8, during a financial crisis, Truett and Dan come up with this wacko idea that we're going to become a service company.
Where did that come from? Was it the two of them, or did they get it from somebody else?
It was,
You know?
I don't know for sure. I know the two of them were on it. I don't know if
Yes.
there were other people involved, but I also know everybody thought it was a crazy idea because it was a time when financial constraints were at their maximum. It's like most of our competitors were laying people off. People were closing offices. Think the pandemic that we've all recently gone through is kind of a time like that where nobody had extra money. But Truett and Dan saw it as a time to take a leap forward, not retreat backward. And so second mile service was created during that time. Literally, we spent millions of dollars. And let me kind of help show how wrong on paper this looked.
Please.
At that time, because a lot of people claim credit now because it worked out great. But at the time, we're in the middle of the budget process. It's tough times. Everybody thinks we need to be trimming back, and they're talking about spending millions of dollars on something we're not currently doing. And the strongest argument I thought was that if people wanted good service, they would go to a white tablecloth restaurant, right? They go to a mid-scale where you not only pay $20 for that same chicken breast that you would pay, $4 or $5 in, but you tip for service. So you've got this whole environment around service. You pay for it because the prices are inflated, and you tip for it. And it's like, if people want a good service, they would go to that kind of a restaurant. By definition, at that time, the last thing you want from a fast food restaurant is service. It's like, I want my food fast. It's the food stupid. Get it to me fast. That's why I had drive-thrus. That's why I had food and bag. It's like, it made no sense whatsoever to take on this service initiative. But fortunately for us, Truett and Dan, could make the final call, and to Chick-fil-A's credit, once that decision was made, everybody rallied around it, even though a lot of people disagreed with it.
Why do you think that's true? Why was the culture able to rally around it?
I think that was the nature of Chick-fil-A
Okay.
people. It's like, once a decision is made, we're going to support it. We'll argue about it before the decision made, but once it's made, the only way we make it successful is like, make good decisions or make your decision good.
Yep. I also think about the Jeff Bezos. He talks about the principle of disagree and commit.
Yes.
Like, while we're debating it, I want you to disagree. If you disagree, like, fight. But once the decision maker makes a decision, I still might disagree, but I'm going to commit to that direction wholeheartedly. Is that just a different context, same principle?
So millions of dollars were spent. Every operator, a lot of their team leaders were brought to Atlanta for training. The whole second mile service initiative was created. And I would tell you today, Chick-fil-A is probably more known for service than food. And again, it's the food stupid. Even some of our operators said, people aren't coming here for service. Why should we spend all this money, time, and effort on service? It's not where they're coming. But what happened was we created a whole new stream of value for people through the service model. And so second mile service was born. But here's the other interesting dimension to that. One of the subsets of second mile service was to reinvent the drive-through experience. We talked about the fact the drive-through experience hadn't been reinvented in 50 years. It's the same. You go up to the sticker box and you speak in the box and you can't hear them and they can't hear you, and that kind of thing. And so we started the reinvention and at that time, during a busy hour, you might get 100 cars through,
Mm.
like max. And people used to have competitions. Maybe they get to 120 or whatever. After the reinvention of the drive-through, by adding technology, by adding second lanes, pickup, all mobile order, all that, routinely people can do 600-700 cars in an hour now during their busiest hour.
Insane.
Insane. No one would have thought it possible. But the point being, in 2019, we had a little national crisis that we're all familiar with now going into 2020. We had to close down the inside of the restaurant. Guess what saved the business?
The drive-through.
The drive-through. That we had a 10-year head start, reinventing, but that reinvention of the drive-through kind of saved the business later. So it's amazing how what seemed like a crazy idea, the second mile service, is now what we're known for. What seemed like reinventing the drive-through was a crazy idea, we didn't have time or money for it, saved the business down the road. But to your point, that's an example, I think, of Chick-fil-A. And now Chick-fil-A delivers, they're looking at all kinds of things. That business is changing very rapidly to the point that now there's a 80,000 square foot innovation center, where if we were to go down there right now, there's 80,000 square feet of innovation going on as we speak, trying to move the business forward and make the business relevant for the future.
Hearing that, I almost feel like core innovation, or the lack of ability to re-innovate the core, is a higher risk factor for companies than social media. I think I agree with Mike Cessario on the risk that social media brings. But when I hear that, I think like the ability to reimagine fundamentally the core value driver of the business, from the product to the service. From service, again, the product stays important, the service stays important, but then drive-through allows you to catch waves or create waves. I think about now Starbucks in 2025, Brian Niccol just rolled out green apron service. Essentially, I don't know the details of it, but I'm imagining it's their version of second mile service 15 years later, maybe. So the risk is at some point, whether it's a year or 15 years, if it works, everybody follows suit. And it's the ability to keep innovating at the core that allows you to stay ahead. And it's hard, like once something works, like once the food works, the chicken sandwich is great, people love it. It's hard to convince people to think, all right, how do we innovate around or within this?
Well, it's interesting that in a broader point, we kept talking about from a marketing standpoint, everybody wants to revert to the norm and the safe. And it's the same thing just with change. Everybody gets comfortable with however we're doing it. And when you start to want to change things, everybody wants to revert to the norm, which will lead to commoditization of whatever you're doing. It's in the extremes. It's getting outside of that we make great advances forward.
So we're obviously getting off topic, but I think this is good. So you have shared with me before an equation. The equation you shared is Q times A equals E.
Yeah.
I'm going to give my worst version of it, and then I have a question on the back end for you. So you'd say Q is the quality of an idea.
Right.
A is the acceptance of the idea. And E equals E is the effectiveness on the execution of that idea. And you believe that most corporate leaders, most businesses are designed to maximize and optimize for the Q. Increase the quality. If there's like a 10-point scale to measure quality, drive to 10 points on quality. And then there's a little bit of and everybody else on the acceptance is like dictated, do it or else. And you talk about it's actually more effective to think about how do we increase A, the acceptance of the idea, which will then lead to a higher output on the effectiveness. As you think about, like we're talking about change and getting people to be open to change and innovating on things that work. It's not just innovating around the broken things, it's innovating around the things that feel good in the moment. How have you seen cultures effectively increase the A or the acceptance of an idea to help in like that change management process?
Gosh, we could spend the rest of the podcast on that, but just kind of in brief, what I would tell you is the reason corporations focus on the Q is they assume if it's a high Q, it'll be a high E, so to speak. A 10 idea is going to be 10 effectiveness. I think the gap that they miss is it may be a 10 idea, but to your point, if the people have to execute that idea, see it as a 5, it will be undermined along the way. And then you'll get 50% effectiveness. And the minute you see people not executing it the way you'd like, our natural tendency is to mandate it. It's like force this into existence. The minute you mandate, if it's a 10 idea and we currently have a 5 acceptance and you mandate people to do it, guess what happens to that 5? It goes to 3 or 2. You know, by definition, the minute you mandate it, the acceptance goes down. I think that's the fundamental flaw in most systems. So I think generically what you got to do, how do we find a way to get people comfortable with the idea? And a lot of times that's shooting some bullets. It's trying on a small scale. You know, it's taking your 10% of the people that are most innovative and most excited, let them do it first, let them take all the arrows and suffer through the pain of making the change, and then let it start to work, and then recruit a few more from the middle.
What do you say?
Recruit a few more
You call
from
it
the middle.
find momentum and fuel it.
Yes.
I believe that's
Yeah.
something I've heard from you before. Yeah.
So I think you've got to find the people who are willing to try it, let them create some success stories, then let them bring other people along. And it takes a little longer, but it also makes it more sustainable in the end.
That's good. All right. We've told the story at a super high level of Liquid Death. Next chapter, we're going to dive into pulling out some of the leading insights. I mean, we've started to do this, but some quotes that we heard and some principles that we think are the foundation, wrong on paper ideas that led to outside success for Liquid Death. The third chapter, we're going to hit some of our favorite creative executions from Liquid Death. And then you've created a fun pop quiz that I had no idea.
To see if you really know.
I had no idea existed until this morning. So this is, I've not seen it. You've told me there's a pop quiz. Our last chapter is going to be putting me on the spot and making me look like hopefully smart, but probably an idiot. So we'll see how that goes. But all right, story of Liquid Death leading insights of Liquid Death. We'll see you in the next chapter.